So you do one big budget at the beginning of the year and it takes 2, 3, 4 months to run that process. And when you finish, you put it down exhausted, you kind of move on and then you forget about it, because think about how quickly things change in our world today. You know, if you spend 3 or 4 months building a plan, say you're calendarized, by December, you finally finish the plan, get it ready to go. And by February 1st, it's already outdated.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Cash is the lifeblood of a company. Cash forecasting is the discovery process to predict your future cash needs. How would you feel if you discovered that you had 4 months of cash left to operate? I'm sure you will lose your sleep. Thus, cash forecasting and understanding your balance sheet are essential. It is especially vital for cash-intensive companies such as manufacturers. In today's episode, we have our guest Alok Ajmera, who discusses the corporate performance management, also known as CPM function, and breaks down its processes into tactical cost saving and strategic components. He also touches on concepts such as continuous and consistent planning. Finally, he explains the role and interactions of CPM and ERP software and what value each of these tools add to an SMB organization. Let me introduce Alok to you. Alok's mission is to ensure that every customer, prospective client, partner, and employee around the world has a memorable and positive experience with Profix. Alok joined the company in 2004 and rocketed from consultant to president and CEO, wearing nearly every hat in the company along the way. Recognized as a visionary in the corporate performance management industry, Alok regularly shares his insights with business analysts and media on what it takes for businesses to adopt, survive, and thrive amidst changing economic and technological conditions, and why it's critical for the Office of Finance to lead the way in establishing organizations that consistently make smart, data-driven decisions. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey, welcome to the show, Alok.
Thanks, Sam. Good to be here.
Okay, amazing. Just to kick things off, Alok, do you want to start with your personal story and current focus?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we're a software company, engineering background, so spent my entire life building and developing software. Having said that, spent the last 15, almost 20 years now focused in the financial space, working with the Office of Finance and CFOs. So in some ways, although I have an engineering heart, I've spent the last decade or two with accountants, so I feel like I have a CPA just by association.
You are doing financial engineering, Alok.
So look, again, focused historically on building software, technology, data, but with a slant really focused in looking into the Office of Finance. My passion really is actually in planning. I don't know how I got into this or why it's resonated so deeply with me, but one of the things that I actually absolutely love for Profix, our own organization, and working with our customers is really helping them build long-term, meaningful strategic plans, and then helping support kind of driving through to execution. So a lot of what we do is looking at, how can we support CFOs, executives, really understand the data that they have within their organization, understand the capabilities that they have across their teams, and bring them together so that they can make better forward-looking plans and views and strategies with regards to how they can grow in a more compelling way. And grow could be top-line revenue, it could be bottom-line, profitability. Grow is a broad term and means different things to different companies based on, their goals and objectives.
Okay, amazing. So we are going to be discussing a lot about planning, because that's definitely a very debatable topic overall in terms of how much you should be planning and how much time we should be spending on planning. But before we do that, as you know, my next question was going to be your perspective on growth. And I don't know if you have already answered that. Do you want to add anything to that by any chance?
Yeah, look, growth is everything. Again, depending on where your company is, what kind of stage of its life cycle, that growth, I put it in kind of air quotes there, could be how do you grow the organization? How do you acquire more customers? How do you move more product? It could mean, how do you, top line revenue is relatively stable, but it's about squeezing out every incremental percentage point of margin so that you can grow kind of overall enterprise value through, profitability. So again, every leadership team, every kind of shareholder will have a different definition of what growth actually is. And there's no real right or wrong answer. It really depends on who you are, what your industry is, what your objectives are as an organization. Having said that, I think planning and analysis actually has a very important role, and oftentimes a undervalued role in supporting those growth objectives. And that's really, what I love to talk about.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, financial control is what I think you are implying there. So that is definitely important. And obviously, if there are going to be any opportunities for cost savings, those are definitely exciting for our target audience, which is CFOs. So now we are going to be talking about the role of planning. So obviously you are passionate about planning, and you are mentioning that the planning is really important. So when we look at Alok in the SMB organizations, they sort of do planning, but they probably don't do as much planning. So how much planning is absolutely essential? Let's say if we take an example of SMB manufacturers, distributors, retailers. So let's say you were the CFO of the manufacturing organization. How much planning would you do? How would you approach the planning for these organizations?
Yeah, great question. Honestly, in my perspective, there's no limit to how much planning you can do for organization. And I'll qualify that in a bit. But before I get there, let me take a step back. You mentioned kind of cost savings, cost reductions, and that's obviously one very important part or aspect of really good kind of financial management, understanding your financials, planning, etc. But there's another side that is often overlooked, which is well-structured, detailed planning actually is a strategic driver that can add substantial value to the organization. And it's not just in cost savings. So let's talk about both of those things, right? So if I think about kind of what we know, corporate performance management as a discipline, software practice, etc., there's two kind of, in my mind, there's two ways of looking at it. There's the tactical components, which are more related to cost savings, efficiencies, etc. And then there are kind of strategic benefits, which have more to do with smarter decision making, much more forward-looking view of the organization, etc. So if I think about the tactical side, it's 100% correct. If you're viewing performance management purely from the tactical side, it's really based on cost savings. How can you drive efficiency through the finance organization? How can you identify potential efficiencies in your operations such that you can save time, you can save energy, you can potentially save some cost. So if you think about an SMB manufacturer, retailer, distributor, etc., oftentimes on the tactical side, they're still running a lot of financial processes in a very non-digital way. That's not to say they're using pen and paper for financial processes, although surprisingly, we've come across organizations that still rely heavily on paper. But oftentimes, financial processes are really heavily kind of intertwined with Excel use. And Excel use is just a step above pen and paper in my mind. Not to say don't worry for the finance and accounting people out there. I'm not suggesting that there's no place for spreadsheets. There's absolutely a place for spreadsheets. However, there's steps above that can really help you streamline. So oftentimes we find customers, again, on this tactical side, not doing consistent or continuous planning because it takes too much time and energy. So you do one big budget at the beginning of the year and it takes 2, 3, 4 months to run that process. And when you finish, you put it down exhausted, you kind of move on and then you forget about it, because think about how quickly things change in our world today. If you spend 3 or 4 months building a plan, say you're calendarized, by December, you finally finish the plan, get it ready to go. And by February 1st, it's already outdated. And so oftentimes in February comes around or you finish a quarter, it's like, well, you forget about the plan. Let's just keep moving on. It's too much effort. And so if you think about whether it's, rolling out an annual budget or rolling out kind of financial reports on a month-to-month basis or doing reforecasts, or if you have multiple entities doing financial consolidation, oftentimes these are incredibly important financial processes. You have to do them, but they just take way too long. And so the kind of one tactical benefit if you think about it in the cost saving perspective, is, really investing in capabilities, technologies, process improvements so that you can streamline these efforts. So at the end of the month, if you're closing your books, it can take a day or two so that you can get good, solid financials out quickly. If you're building a plan, streamline that so it can take weeks, so that if you're finishing off a quarter, you have the energy then to potentially do a reforecast. So that's one aspect of it, right? It's much more, I would say, tactical. It's if you have strong corporate performance management practices within the business, you can reduce costs in terms of headcount spend if you so choose. You can then, or as many of our customers end up doing, is instead of cutting down the team, it's like, how do you free up time to spend that time doing more meaningful work, which is the big kind of more value add strategic side of things. So if something is taking you 2 weeks out of every month and you can streamline that to a couple of days, then you have the ability of reinvesting that saved time to do things that are more meaningful, which is actually understand the data that you have, understand the metrics that you have, provide more insight, provide more guidance to the operating teams so that smarter decisions can be made. Sam, I'll pause there. Does that make sense on the kind of tactical side of performance management's practices are beneficial?
It does. And we are actually going to dig slightly deeper into that. So let's talk about some of the features of the corporate performance management software. And it does not need to be just the software. I think I'm talking more towards the processes. I know you have touched a bit on these two, but we are going to be digging slightly deeper. So let's take some examples. So I have seen both of the practices. I have worked in the large enterprise corporate houses, to be honest. And honestly speaking, I don't even know if they were doing the CPM practices right or not, or probably they were over engineering. Okay, so in their case, they had very large development team just because either they could not find the off-the-shelf CPM software or whatever, or maybe that industry was different. So I'm talking about the logistics or freight industry. In their case, the way they recognize the revenue is completely different. So they have to do a lot of what if scenarios, and they have to find out if there are any ways of optimizing the revenue. This I have seen in a lot of different industries, such as airline, just because the way they recognize the revenue, the way they optimize it, typically, if they actually analyze that, there could be potential revenue or the savings opportunity there. So I have seen very, very heavy bloated processes from the CPM perspective, but we have also seen very small processes, as you mentioned, that this is going to be simply the budget towards the beginning of the year, and then nobody is really tracking the budget, right? And end of the year, you are probably figuring out that, we have to plan now because we are already out of budget. So in your experience, how these processes or features that these businesses require vary across the organizations, across the companies, and what is going to be the optimal for most organizations?
Yeah, look, you bring up a good point, especially at the beginning, right, where there are many enterprise organizations that have very big finance, IT organizations, very heavy kind of solution-based organizations that are, I think I'm going to use your words, bloated, right? And so although they have technologies and tools and practices in place, they're incredibly inefficient. And so they don't necessarily benefit from the agility that a good corporate performance management solution or practice would provide. What's interesting is, over the last decade, as the cloud has become more prevalent, what we're seeing from a software trend is that a lot of capabilities that were once only available to enterprise organizations that were willing to spend the money getting the technologies and building the infrastructure internally are becoming more and more available to SMB organizations in a much more easy to use, intuitive, fluid manner. So you don't need to acquire technology and then have a giant IT organization to support you, or you don't have to have over-engineered practices. They can be substantially more nimble and more agile, which is much more conducive for SMB organizations. In fact, we kind of look at the world where SMB organizations, just by the nature of their size and alignment within the organization and a general agility from a business perspective, are actually able to benefit from corporate performance management practices and solutions better than their enterprise peers, just from their general kind of mindset and agility. So having said that, let me go into some of the examples you talked about, kind of aerospace and revenue recognition nuances and differences. And that's a really good example because what if scenario analysis, that's actually incredibly valuable and incredibly important, but very difficult to do in a meaningful way when processes are not automated and practices are not digital. And so again, there is value in if you can build really efficient, forecasting processes within your organization. And again, that's partially technology, right? How do you streamline the work effort and automate manual tasks, the collection of data, the dissemination of data, the aggregation from multiple sources? If you can automate the workflow process, so think about any kind of forecast or what if scenario. Usually it's not one person sitting in the room doing a what if scenario. Usually it's, you're collecting information from all different parts of the organization and then putting it together to come up with a more compelling scenario, right? And so if you can orchestrate all of the menial kind of manual tasks, then, and which by the way is what takes a bunch of the time. It's actually unfortunate. It's the taking data out of various systems, putting it into an Excel spreadsheet, formatting it so that it makes sense, sending that spreadsheet to someone, waiting for them to fill it out, then breaking a link somewhere along the lines, you collecting it back, hunting someone down, manually putting it, that's what actually takes the lion's share of the time. And so either you just don't do it because you're sitting back saying, look, it's just too much time, energy, and effort, and I'm not going to get value at the end. Or you do it, but you have no time to actually make sense of what's come back. You're up till midnight the day before the board meeting, just putting this stuff together. And then getting it onto a PowerPoint so someone can present it. Both scenarios add very little value. Now, if you can fast forward and say, you know what, I can automate a lot of that manual processes, collecting the data, disseminating it, managing the workflow, putting it all together, running the data through models, running through kind of prescriptive or forward-looking algorithms, then you could actually free yourself up to understand the data that's coming in, to look at the scenarios, to say, you know what, let me do another slice or a different cut so that when you are presenting, whether it's to the executive management team, to your board, to other shareholders, there's way more thought and analysis that's gone into the numbers that you're presenting. Sam, let me give you a quick example. In the last 12 months, as a globe, we've had this massively disruptive kind of external event going on with this pandemic. And I remember being kind of in the spring of this time last year thinking, okay, what's going to happen? The wheels felt like they were starting to fall apart, and we were going into this incredibly uncertain time without any really good understanding about when would we come out of this kind of pandemic, right? And so what we were end up doing, and what a lot of our customers were doing, is actually incredibly detailed and very frequent scenario analysis. So think about, if you're an aerospace manufacturer, maybe you're building some parts. Think about what you were feeling in March 31st, 2020, right? What's going to happen to your demand forecasts? What's going to happen to the industry at large, right? And so what a lot of our organizations were doing, we're starting to do monthly and then weekly multi-year reforecast. So all of a sudden we had our agile customers shifting gears and saying, you know what, it's not enough to even do a quarterly reforecast to see how we're trending to the end of the year. What we really need to do is start doing, every month they'd close the books and then do a rolling 36 or 48 month plan. So what does the world look like for the next 3 years? What are various cuts and scenarios? If we have a recovery that's sooner, if if it prolongs, if we cannot get our operations, or if we have a supply chain issue, or if they're doing various cuts of the scenario, pushing it out multiple years, and then most importantly, translating it across all of your financial statements. Oftentimes we get so consumed with looking at our P&L and trying to understand the puts and takes of the P&L, and we forget about the balance sheet, which at the end of the day is exceptionally important. And I know for our audience here, CFOs, you understand what I'm saying. It's what decisions are we making over the next couple of years in very uncertain times? How are we analyzing that, and how are we understanding how it flows down into the balance sheet and ultimately into the cash flow, right? And then doing that in a almost real-time manner with new data, new insights, new kind of objectives.
Okay, amazing. So I definitely agree there. In fact, I'm going to tell you a little bit of story there in terms of that we heard recently in an episode. And this is extremely critical for manufacturer, especially since you are talking about the forward-looking planning on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis or on a quarterly basis, right? So one of the stories that I am actually trying to bring from the manufacturer perspective is we had one of the CFOs here on the show, and they were working with a manufacturer, and the way their processes were set up is they were doing the cash flow planning on a monthly basis. I mean, they were looking at their cash. Okay, how much cash did they have left? And they were probably doing some sort of reporting, the way you explained. So one day they find that they had the cash left only for 4 months. Can you believe this? Okay, 4 months. You are running a professional services organization, Alok. Okay, and I'm running a professional services organization as well. If I don't have cash here for next 18 months, I'm going to be super stressed. Now imagine a manufacturer. They are super capital intensive and they had cash left for 4 months. Obviously, that's not a pretty situation. So I think the point that you are trying to bring is here is if you are, let's say, able to do your weekly planning or monthly planning, or the shorter the better, right? The more real time insight you have, the forward looking, the better it is going to be. So obviously, I don't know if you are going to have any thoughts around this story, if you have any other stories that you might be able to share similar to this. But what I really want to talk about is just understanding of the ERP system from the CPM system. My understanding of these two systems is going to be that ERP is sort of your past and your present, but your CPM is going to be slightly more forward looking, right? But majority of the SMB manufacturers, I don't know how many are really utilizing a CPM function, but in my opinion, based on this story, a CPM function is critically important because you have to have visibility into your cash. You have to have visibility into your balance sheet, the way you were describing how exceptionally important balance sheet is. So do you want to talk about the importance of CPM and how that plays with the ERP system?
Yeah, great story, first of all. And I totally understand what you're saying. If I sat down with my CFO and looked out into the future and saw only 4 months of cash coverage, I would be up all night. And so just to add on to what you said really quickly at the story, I think it's frequency of, in this case, cash forecasting is incredibly important. But I would also suggest that the length of your cash view is important as well. So, oftentimes you'll see SMB organizations looking at cash kind of on a month-to-month basis and projecting out maybe a month or two or maybe even a quarter. But if you think about how capital intense these businesses are, it's actually more important to look at cash over a longer time horizon. So imagine if you could do a weekly cash forecast and have a rolling 12-month view or 18-month view in terms of cash. What it does is it enables you to make smarter operating decisions, because now you can say, we're thinking about XYZ potential scenario, right? Making an investment, adding some capital costs, maybe cutting down, whatever that decision is. And then you want to see how does that ripple through on a regular basis all the way out for the next X number of months. And so you can be in a much better control of understanding the business and the cash coverage, which hopefully lets you sleep better at night. The next point, you mentioned kind of the differences between ERP and CPM. And I think you nailed it, right? ERP is mission critical. Like, it helps you run the day-to-day operations, and it keeps track of all of the nuances and transactions that are occurring in the past, today and backwards, where corporate performance management solutions and practices are really about taking today and looking forward. And so I think it brings it's an incredibly powerful combination, right? Keep track of everything that's happening and then leverage that data, leverage that information to look into the future to see where are you trending? How are you planning to progress? And so I feel like you can't run day to day without the ERP. It's mission critical. But I would argue the real strategic value comes from looking forward, not looking backwards. And so the CPM practice and solution is vital for, especially in markets with high volatility, which we all live in, growth-oriented organizations. Like, looking forward is vital. It's critical to the organization.
Yeah. So let's go back to your comment about the data quality. And I am going to tell you one more story. And when I work with my accountant, he really hates me. And the reason for that is because, see, what I want to do is I want to save time, right? So for me, let's say if I'm doing the financial statement, whether I capture the insurance amount in the month 1 or month 2, I don't really care, to be honest. As long as that is a part of the same P&L, because we are not really closing the books.
Oh my God, Sam, all your CFO audience members are shuddering. They're covering their ears right now.
I know, right? But I mean, so for us, I mean, monthly planning is a different part. I have planning on my hands because we are not very big as such. So we can do the planning, but my accountant really hates me. My CFO hates me because the data quality is extremely critical, obviously, for them. If let's say they want to do the cash planning and they want to do the forecasting. And that's the reason why they are super particular about capturing the expenses in the right month, capturing the revenue in the right month. So now my question to you is going to be, are you seeing any sort of trends and technologies in your space where you might be able to detect these anomalies, let's say from AI? I don't know what kind of advances have been made in terms of technology, so they can really flag people like me so that My accountant does not have to yell at me.
Yeah, Sam, you bring up a really good point. There are absolutely technologies that are emerging that have very powerful use cases that can help streamline, in your example, anomaly detection, but even trend analysis and forecasting and et cetera. I'll get into that in one moment, but let me dig into the data quality conversation. Oftentimes when you have kind of performance management practices, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you have really poor structured data, it's hard to build on that to produce better forward-looking data. So I highly encourage, it can feel daunting, right? Oftentimes you're running an organization, usually SMB manufacturers or retailers, et cetera. All the energy goes into, product or, expansion or customer facing, things that are going to drive the business forward. And oftentimes we underinvest in kind of core financial systems because they're kind of quote unquote back office. It's if it's not broken, you don't need to fix it. It's good enough, right? But it's super important. And there's all sorts of great technologies and tools and practices ones can use to really clean data in a more quicker way. It doesn't have to be a nightmare in terms of getting data in a better structure. So I just wanted to address that because you brought that up, and it's a legitimate problem or challenge that SMB organizations face. The second side of it on the emerging technology piece, and again, there are amazing AI technologies that are actually coming out. I think AI in the topic of accounting and finance is actually incredibly valuable. It can be daunting, and it can also be kind of buzzy. People can kind of, roll their eyes and say, it sounds a little too good to be true. It's a good marriage actually for a couple of different reasons. Oftentimes when you're thinking about AI or things like machine learning, they do really well in structured environments where you have data, you have consistent business logic, business rules, repetition of tasks. And so AI and anomaly detection works really well in finance and accounting type organizations. So one of the kind of first use cases that we saw that we brought to market from an AI perspective is exactly to your point, anomaly detection. Things are happening in a business on a regular cadence. You're putting in your insurance expenses usually on a regular basis. And if it doesn't show up all of a sudden, that's an anomaly that can get flagged and you can do something more proactively about it. On the flip side, it affects also if there are unusual transactions, right? Potentially, we live in a world today where cybersecurity is a very real thing and cyber threat is a very real thing. So it also helps kind of look at all the transactions to identify, are there potentially fraudulent transactions that are being put into the organization? And so these are very amazing emerging technologies that are today adding value for organizations. But if you fast forward a couple more years, it's only accelerating in its adoption. And so one thing I would tell our audience in particular, if you're sitting back and you're saying, it's good enough right now, my finance accounting organization is fine. I have X number of people, we work in Excel, it works okay. I would challenge you in a couple of things. One, you're probably missing out on a substantial opportunity for strategic value add and potential cost savings along the way by investing in a practice to actually build more capabilities. But the broader risk in my mind is actually out 3 to 5 years, where the pace of technology advancement is actually growing at an alarming rate. And the way in which corporate finance groups are going to be working in the future, and I'll put that in air quotes, in terms of, the next kind of 5 odd years, is dramatically different than what's happening today. And if you're not getting ready, if you're not building the right tooling, if you're not bringing in the right skills into your organization today, you will not be able to keep up with what's coming down the pipe in the next kind of, again, 3, 5, 7 years, but your competitors might. And so now all of a sudden you think about finance where in many of you, it's a back office, it's just putting numbers together, where, I think it's actually substantially more strategic. There's way more data that can be analyzed. There's more modeling that can be done. There's better decisions that can be made. And it can actually drive strategic and compelling competitive differentiation in an organization. And so it's interesting to talk about the journey today, but again, I'm a planner. I like to think about the future. The change is happening so dramatic in the next generation, if you will, that you have to be able to keep up with this.
Okay, amazing, Alok. So that's it for today. Do you have any last minute closing thoughts by any chance?
I would tell SMB CFOs in the space, really, it can feel overwhelming and daunting to think about AI technologies and data and how are you going to make smarter decisions. What I would encourage you is that it's just one step at a time. Think about the processes that you're running today and how you can make incremental investments in skills and tools and training for your organization to streamline? And then how do you drive some value from that and reinvest it and keep going down this journey of digital transformation?
Okay, and my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be, do not ever sit on 4 months cash. That is going to be exceptionally important for you. And obviously your balance sheet is exceptionally important for you as well. So do not ignore that. On that note, Alok, I really want to thank you for your time. It's been a fun and insightful conversation.
Thank you, Sam. Great conversation.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Alok or how Profix CPM software can transform the way you work by automating your budgeting, forecasting, and reporting processes, head over to profix.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Aaron Spool from Aventus Advisory Group, who describes what it means to have a cash flow mindset in the organization. Also, the interview with Brian Sommer, who discusses why legacy ERP systems and artificial accounting practices need to change with time. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.